My son tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, do you not have a real job?" He asked it loud enough for the whole table to go quiet. Today was my father's 70th birthday, held in a banquet room on the third floor of a large hotel. Warm yellow lights, red wine, 20 guests dressed sharply. Name cards placed neatly beside each plate, perfume mixing with the buttery smell of warm bread, phone cameras already lifted. My father stood up and tapped his glass lightly. The room fell silent. "My son is a lawyer," he said. "He opened his own practice. He is stable." A polite round of applause followed. Then he looked at me. "And her? She still works freelance. The kind of job where if the Wi-Fi goes out, the income goes with it." A few laughs broke out. He added one more line. "Not everyone is born to carry weight." This time, the laughter faded. I looked down at my son's hand, gripping the edge of the tablecloth. He was waiting for an answer. And for the first time in years, I set my glass down, let it touch the table softly, and looked straight toward the front of the room. 5 years earlier, my husband lost $600,000 in a real estate deal he was certain would change our lives, and then he left. There was no dramatic scene, no long apology. Just one morning when I looked at my bank account and understood I was alone. I was 38, carrying my 5-year-old son back to my parents' house with 2 suitcases and a bag of toys. My father opened the door, looked at the 2 suitcases. "The basement behind the kitchen," he said. "You can stay there. No windows, cold concrete floor, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, the damp smell of old storage boxes. No lease, no written agreement, just temporary. Just temporary, until you are stable," my father repeated that night, while I was spreading sheets on the bed for my son. I nodded, because at that point I had nothing to negotiate with. The first night I lay on a thin mattress, placed directly on the concrete floor. My son slept on the other side of the room, his nightlight plugged into the wall, casting a pale yellow glow onto the low ceiling. I heard the toilet flush upstairs, my father's footsteps crossing the living room, chairs scraping across hardwood. The basement was not soundproof. Every sound passed through the ceiling, a reminder that I was underneath. The next morning, I woke before 5, folded the blanket neatly, and pushed it against the wall. I did not want anyone saying I was messy. I wiped down the folding table before opening my laptop, even though it was already clean. I learned to work in complete silence. No music, no raised voice. When my son asked when we would have a room with a window, I said when Mom earns enough to buy one. I did not say how much enough was. My brother had just opened his law office on Main Street with money my parents invested. Brand new sign, leather chairs, still smelling new. On opening night, my father raised his glass and said, "My son is the future, my daughter is flexible." He said, flexible like it was praise. I stood by the buffet, holding a glass of water, and smiling just enough. Every time they discussed family matters, I was moved aside like an extra chair. No one asked my opinion. No one asked about my schedule. In those first weeks in the basement, I woke at 5 to make coffee before my father came downstairs. I opened my laptop on the folding table, plugged in my headset, spoke with clients in different time zones. My son sat on the floor building Lego and asked when we would have our own house. I said when Mom is stable. At night, when the family ate upstairs, I heard my father tell a neighbor that I was freelancing, trying different things online. "Do not ask her about money," he said. "She has never been stable." I kept eating, chewing slowly, not reacting. One time my father handed me a document. He placed the stack of papers on the table. "Sign it." I flipped to the first page. "What am I signing?" He said it was to confirm that I had no rights to the house. I read all 3 pages before looking up. "Why do I have to sign?" He said it was a financial restructuring to support my brother. My brother stood in the kitchen doorway. "Do not make this more complicated than it is." I read every line carefully. My name appeared nowhere except on the signature line. I set the pen down on the table. "My lawyer needs to review this," I said. He looked at me for a few seconds and shrugged, as if I were overreacting to something small. My brother walked past and patted my father on the shoulder. "Just let me handle it." I looked at both of them, then turned back to my laptop. The mornings in the basement were colder than I expected, especially in winter. I bought a small space heater with what was left of my savings. My father asked if I still had enough money. I said enough to pay the internet bill, because if the internet went out, then I really would be unemployed the way he liked to joke. He laughed. I laughed too. Just enough. My son started preschool near the house. One time, the teacher asked what I did for work to fill out the parent information form. I said I run a brand strategy company. She looked up at me as if to confirm. From the basement, I said my work does not require windows. At night, I called a new client and discussed a repositioning strategy for their retail chain. My son slept on the fold-out bed behind me, holding a worn stuffed bear. I turned off the lights late and climbed into my own bed, listening to my father's footsteps on the hardwood floor above. He walked back and forth in the living room, talking on the phone about investing in my brother's law office. I heard the bank's name mentioned. I heard the word mortgage. The next morning, I searched the public records. The house had been mortgaged a second time. I printed the documents and placed them in a separate folder. When my father said just temporary, until you are stable, I understood that stable was not a clear point in time. It was a condition he could redefine whenever he wanted. I did not argue. I opened another bank account in my own name. I signed a contract with an accountant. I hired my own lawyer. At night, while the family watched the news upstairs, I stayed in the basement, the light from my laptop reflecting off the concrete walls. I heard my father tell a friend on the phone, "My son is the future. My daughter is flexible." I looked at my revenue spreadsheet, the numbers increasing quarter by quarter. I did not correct him. I let time and paperwork do their work. I do not sell things online. I build a brand strategy company for retail businesses, stores with real signs on real streets and real invoices at the end of the month. In the morning, I open my laptop on the folding table, put on my headset, set my coffee near the edge of the table. I say quietly to myself, begin. I text freelancers, send briefs, lock in deadlines. I wire payments on time. No one upstairs asks. The lawyer sends contracts. I read every line, then sign. I slide the printed copy into a blue folder and lock the drawer. The first contract was signed at 9:12 at night. I remember because my son was asleep on the couch behind me, and I did not want to make noise. I printed the contract, signed my name at the bottom, placed a copy into a blue file. I did not tell anyone upstairs about that contract. I opened a separate bank account for the company. The first time I signed as chief executive officer, I paused for a second to make sure I was not pretending. I set a longer password than usual and wrote it down in a small notebook kept separately. Whenever money came in, I did not spend it right away. I watched the balance grow slowly, week by week, then month by month. I learned to read financial statements, learned to speak with my accountant using terms I had only heard in passing before. No one upstairs asked what I was doing. I did not invite anyone down to see. 3 months later, I signed a second contract. 6 months later, I had a team of freelancers working hourly, sending invoices each week and getting paid on time. The first year, I did not buy a new car. I did not replace my phone. I let the money sit in the company account. The second year, I registered an additional tax ID, expanded services, spent hours in online meetings with retail chain owners in another state. The third year, the spreadsheet showed 2 million. I did not celebrate. I hit save, then opened the next email. I printed that year's report in 2 copies. One for the accountant. One I folded and placed into the blue folder, locked in the drawer. I did not hang awards on the basement wall. I did not post anything on social media. I only increased my son's insurance coverage and scheduled his dental appointment earlier. When my father said I lived month to month, I opened my banking app and looked at the reserve fund covering 12 months of living expenses. I did not argue. I did not need to. Upstairs, my father laughed and said, "Do not ask her about money. She lives month to month." I simply adjusted the payment calendar and checked whether this week's payroll had cleared. The ceiling was not thick enough to block his voice. His friend laughed and said, "Flexible is good." I continued emailing clients, confirming the launch schedule for a new campaign. One time, my father came down to the basement and looked at my laptop screen. "You do this all day?" he asked. "All day," I said. "Is it stable?" he asked. "It is," I said. He nodded and went upstairs. I pulled the contract file back up and sent another copy to my lawyer. Upstairs, I heard my father telling a relative that I was trying different things online. I did not go up to correct him. I reviewed the payment schedule, paid my freelancers on time, filed taxes on time. When the fiscal year ended, I printed the report, bound it, and placed it in a locked drawer. My father kept saying in front of others, "Do not ask her about money. She lives month to month." I did not correct him. I did not argue. I let the numbers sit quietly in the bank account, let the contracts with signatures and my lawyer's seal speak for themselves. I kept working every morning, kept signing new contracts, kept expanding the team. I waited for the right moment. One evening after dinner, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, my father placed a thin stack of neatly clipped papers in front of me. "Sign here," he said, in the same tone he would use to ask for the salt. I dried my hands with a towel and opened the packet. The first line stated clearly that I acknowledged I had no rights to the house. I looked up. "Why do I have to sign this?" I asked. My father pulled out a chair and sat down. "It is just financial restructuring," he said. "We need to reorganize things to support your brother. His office is expanding. He needs working capital." I turned each page, reading slowly line by line. There was no clause protecting me or my son, only the signature line waiting at the end. "You have no rights to this house," he repeated, as if to make sure I heard him. I closed the packet and set it on the table. "My lawyer needs to review this," I said. He looked at me for a moment, then shrugged. "There is nothing complicated about it. It is just paperwork." My brother walked in from the living room. "Dad, just let her sign it," he said. "Everything is urgent right now." I did not answer him. The next morning I searched the county public records. The house had been mortgaged a second time. The signing date matched the week my brother opened his new branch. I downloaded the documents, printed them, and placed them in a folder. The loan of $1.3 million was in my father's name. The bank was a major commercial institution in the state. Under collateral, the house was listed first. That afternoon when my brother came home from work, I asked how the office expansion was going. "Fine," he said. "We just need a little more capital to keep things moving." I asked where the capital was coming from. He looked at my father and said, "Dad is handling it." That night I reopened the loan file and read every clause. If there was a default, the bank had the right to seize the property. No exception for the basement. No exception for a daughter and her child. I stood in the middle of the basement and looked up at the ceiling, listening to footsteps crossing the hardwood floor above. My son was sitting on the carpet, building Lego. "Mom, can I bring my new pencil case to school tomorrow?" he said. "Yes," I answered, my eyes still on the printed pages in my hand. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a private attorney. The office was small, 2 windows facing a parking lot, the smell of brewed coffee in the waiting area. I placed the folder on his desk. "This is the house where my son and I are living," I said. The attorney flipped through each page and asked if I had signed anything. "Not yet," I said. He nodded. "If you sign, you are confirming you have no rights and the bank can seize the property if the loan is not paid," he said. "Including the basement?" I asked. "Including the entire collateral property," he replied. I sat up a little straighter. On the way home, I stopped by the bank where my company held its account and requested detailed statements of my transactions for the past 3 years. I placed everything in a separate folder. That night my father asked if I had signed. "Not yet," I said. "I need to fully understand before I sign anything." He looked at me, displeased but silent. My brother said quietly, "You are making this bigger than it is." I did not argue. I continued working with my attorney, asking him to review every clause and advise me on my legal options. For the first time since returning to that basement, I had a lawyer representing me, not the family, not my brother's law office, but me. My family is well known in our local church. Every Sunday, my father wore a dark blue suit and striped tie, standing at the entrance, shaking hands as if it were a required ritual. He served as head of the fundraising committee, his name printed on the board near the entrance beside the list of the highest donating families of the year. On holidays, he held the microphone and spoke about responsibility and honor. I usually sat in the back row with my son beside me, his hands holding a free coloring booklet. After the service, when everyone gathered for coffee in the hall, I heard whispers. "His daughter is hard to figure out," a woman said quietly to her friend, and I heard it clearly, even though they thought I did not. Hard to figure out meant not like my brother, not working a profession with a sign on the door, not wearing a suit every morning. I stood near the pastry table, poured myself more coffee, smiled just enough when someone glanced my way. My son ran off to play tag with other children around the folding chairs. I saw him stop when a taller boy said something. "Your mom does not have a real job," I heard clearly. The boy turned and looked at me, his eyes searching for something, maybe confirmation. I walked over and placed my hand on my son's shoulder. "Let's go home," I said, my voice steady like always. That night, while I was checking work emails, my phone vibrated. The school number appeared on the screen. My son's teacher was calling, I answered. She spoke gently, said there had been an exchange between the kids that day, that my son had almost gotten into a fight after hearing someone say his mother did not have a real job. I thanked her for letting me know and said I would talk to him. I did not explain my work in detail, did not mention contracts or revenue. I only asked if the school needed any additional information about parents' occupations. She said no, she just wanted to make sure my son was okay. I hung up and looked down at my hand resting on the keyboard. I printed the teacher's email, folded it, and placed it in the same folder as my financial documents. Not to sue anyone, just to remember. The following Sunday, when I walked into church, I saw two women talking who stopped when I passed. One gave a polite smile, the other looked down at her phone. I sat a little straighter than usual throughout the service. When it came time for donations, I wrote a check for more than I had before. I did not hand it directly to my father. I placed it in the shared envelope like everyone else. My son came out of his room later and asked if I was unemployed. I closed my laptop. "I have a job," I said. "I work every day. I pay the electric bill, the water bill, your school tuition." He nodded, as if that was enough of an answer for a child. The next morning I took him to school earlier than usual. In the parking lot I saw a few parents talking. One of them, someone I recognized from church, looked at me and joked that flexible is good, as long as you are happy. I gave a short smile in return. In the school office, I updated the parent information form and clearly listed my title. The receptionist read it, looked up at me for a second, then said thank you. That evening at home, my father was on the phone in the living room. I heard him mention the church fund and the trust of the community. I sat in the basement reviewing a newly signed contract. My son sat beside me doing homework, slowly writing the first letter of his name. I heard my father laugh loudly upstairs, his voice confident as always. I looked at my son and noticed he was writing more slowly than usual. I asked how school was. I asked if anyone said anything about me. He shook his head. I did not ask again. I reopened the teacher's email and read it line by line. It was not anything serious, just something children said. But I knew where those words were coming from. The following Sunday, when we were sitting in church again, I heard a man behind me tell his wife that the fundraising chair's daughter works freelance. That must be interesting. I turned and looked at them, nodded in greeting. They nodded back, slightly uncomfortable. The hymn began and everyone stood. My son stood beside me, singing softly, along with the words on the screen. I looked straight ahead. For the first time I understood that my silence, the thing I believed was keeping the peace, was walking out of that church with my son every week. The VIP guest at my father's 70th birthday dinner was the CEO of, and my father had mentioned him all week as if this were the opportunity of his life. Before the event began, I saw my father standing near the entrance, adjusting his tie, telling my mother that tonight was important, that if everything went well, he could raise $2 million for the church's new project. $2 million, he repeated, his voice low but clear, as if saying it enough times would make it real. When the CEO walked into the banquet room, the table near the front stood to shake his hand. My father stepped forward, smiled widely and said it was an honor to have him there. I sat toward the middle of the room and watched. He wore a light gray suit, his handshake firm, his conversation concise. He did not look at me longer than a polite glance, because he did not know who I was in that room. What my father did not know, and never asked, was that for 18 months, I had been building the repositioning strategy for his supermarket chain. 18 months of early morning video meetings, 18 months of reports, revisions, market analysis, working with his internal marketing team. My contract with the company was a 7-figure agreement, signed by the same CEO sitting at the VIP table. But he had never known I was the daughter of the man hosting the dinner, because in every email and every meeting, I was simply Julia, Chief Executive Officer of my company. Before dinner was served, I saw my father pull his chair closer to the VIP table, lean in and speak quietly about the fundraising plan, about community vision, about support from local businesses. $2 million was mentioned 3 times in 5 minutes, like a promise. I did not interrupt that conversation. I sat straight, placed my phone face down on the table, looked across the room where the chandelier light reflected off the polished surface. After a while, the CEO turned to the person beside him and asked about the city, about the church community. He said he believed in investing in the right place, the right way. My father nodded repeatedly, saying we were fortunate to have leaders like him. I looked at the glass of water in front of me and thought about the 2-hour Zoom meetings where he listened as I presented expansion strategy. He had never asked about my family, and I had never told him. In his eyes, I was a strategic partner, not the daughter of a man seeking funding. When the appetizers were served, my father stood up and circled the VIP table once more, placing his hand on the back of the CEO's chair and saying that tonight truly meant a great deal to our family. I heard that clearly. Our family. I remained seated. No reaction. The CEO nodded and smiled politely. He did not know he was sitting between 2 different stories, one about raising $2 million and one about 18 months of brand repositioning that had reshaped his company's image across the state. I looked around the room, saw my brother speaking with a few young attorneys, saw my mother adjusting the flowers on the table. None of them knew that the 7-figure contract carried the signature of the man being treated as the evening's savior. No one asked what I was doing professionally. 2 worlds sat in the same room, separated by a few steps and a speech that had not yet begun. I knew that one sentence at the right moment would make those 2 worlds collide. But at that moment I remained still, observing, letting everything unfold in its own order. After my son's question, the air in the banquet room felt thinner, as if someone had quietly removed oxygen. I saw a few guests still holding their wine glasses without taking another sip. I placed my napkin on the table, smoothed the edge of my skirt out of habit, and stood up. I did not push my chair back harshly, did not create unnecessary noise. I simply stood. I run a brand strategy company, I said, my voice steady and clear enough for the table to hear. My company made $4.2 million last year. I am leading the restructuring campaign for Mr. Harrison's corporation. Then I stopped. No further explanation. No emphasis. I looked toward the VIP table. Every set of eyes in the room followed. The CEO set his knife down on the plate, the sound of metal touching porcelain sharper than usual. He wiped his hands with his napkin, adjusted his cuff, and looked directly at me. Julia is the strategist behind the campaign that delivered 32% growth for us last quarter, he said, his tone even, without drama. I saw someone near the door lower their glass. My brother straightened in his seat, his hand holding his wine glass frozen midair. My father looked from me to the CEO, his lips moving slightly as if searching for the right words. The CEO turned toward him. Is that what you call freelance work? He did not raise his voice, did not smile. It was simply a question placed precisely where it belonged. No one laughed. The server who was about to clear plates paused for a second and then continued. I heard the soft scrape of chairs as a few guests shifted in their seats. My father set his glass down a little too firmly, the wine rising close to the rim. He said a few short words, but they did not form a complete sentence. My brother looked down at the table and said nothing. I sat back down, placed both hands on the table, palms flat, my back straight. My son looked at me, then at his grandfather, then at the CEO. I turned to him. Keep eating, sweetheart, I said quietly. The main course was served, salmon placed in front of each guest as if nothing had happened. But the conversations had shifted. A few people stood earlier than planned. Sorry, I have an early meeting tomorrow, one man said. I noticed he shook my father's hand more quickly than before. The CEO exchanged a few brief words with the person beside him and then stood. He extended his hand to me. "We will talk more next week," he said. I nodded. "Yes, of course." He then shook my father's hand, short and polite. When he left the banquet room, I saw the expressions on a few other faces change as well. No one mentioned the internet comment again. No one mentioned unemployment. The volume of conversation lowered, as if someone had adjusted a dial for the entire room. My father remained seated at the head of the table, but he was no longer the center of the conversation. My brother lowered his head and looked at his phone, the screen reflecting the yellow light onto his face. I took a sip of water and turned to my son. "Is the fish good?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, Mom." After a few minutes, I stood and told my mother I would take him home. She nodded, her lips pressed together. I picked up my coat, took my son's hand, and walked out of the banquet room. Behind me, there were still chairs scraping and quiet whispers, but no laughter. The party did not end with an explosion. It ended with silences long enough for everyone to understand that the positions in the room had shifted. 3 days after the dinner, I was sitting at the folding table in the basement when my phone vibrated. The CEO's name appeared on the screen. I answered. He said briefly that he would withdraw from sponsoring my brother's law office project. His tone was calm and direct. That evening was not what I expected. He said, "We will pause all related commitments for now." I said I understood and thanked him for calling me directly. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. Upstairs, I heard my father's office door close harder than usual. That afternoon the bank called. This time they called my father, but I heard every word through the thin ceiling. They requested additional collateral for the $1.3 million loan. I heard the word additional repeated twice. My brother said it was just a formality. His voice was not as steady as before. The next morning, my father put on his suit earlier than usual. He said he had to go to an urgent meeting at church. That same afternoon, my mother came down to the basement. She stood on the stairs, her hand gripping the railing. "The church has asked your father to step aside from his leadership role for a while," she said. "The reason," she added, "is to avoid misunderstandings." I nodded. I did not ask more. That afternoon, when I picked up my son from school, I saw 2 men standing in front of the corner coffee shop talking. They looked at me for a second and then looked away. The news spread faster than I expected. No one called directly to ask. No one came to knock on the door. But every time I walked into the grocery store or a parking lot, I felt eyes linger a little longer than usual. No one spoke out loud, but everyone knew. I received 3 emails that week from businesses that had previously worked with my family. They did not mention the party. They simply asked whether my company was taking on new projects next quarter. I replied to each email, sent detailed proposals, signed 2 new contracts. Meanwhile, my brother canceled a client meeting because he lacked operating capital. I knew because I heard my mother tell a friend on the phone. She said it was all a misunderstanding. I did not correct her. That evening, my father sat at the dining table with a stack of documents in front of him. My brother stood beside him, speaking quietly but loud enough for me to hear from the staircase. "If they do not sponsor us, the expansion plan will have to stop," he said. My father did not answer right away. He flipped through each page as if he could find a line that would rescue the situation. I walked down, took a glass of water, said nothing. No one asked me to leave. No one mentioned the ownership waiver papers again, but I knew I could not stay and wait for another decision. I called a real estate agency the next morning. I asked about the small house on the north side of town that I had viewed a few weeks earlier. Within 30 days, I signed a lease. I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes, labeled them carefully. My son asked if we were really moving. I said we would have our own space. I rented a small truck and moved most of the boxes myself with a friend. My father stood at the garage door as I loaded the last box. He did not tell me I had to leave. I did not wait for him to ask me to stay. When I closed the truck door, my brother stood behind my father, his hands in his pockets, his eyes looking away. I drove out of the driveway without being told to. I left before they could think about asking. As the truck rolled forward, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the garage door grow smaller. My son sat in the back seat holding his Lego box and asked if he could hang his drawings in the new house. I said yes. I did not turn on the radio. I drove slowly past the street where I used to walk to high school. I realized I no longer saw it as a place to return to, just an address. There was no argument, no dramatic goodbye, just the sound of a car door closing and tires rolling off concrete. 3 days earlier, there had been a party. 3 days later, everything had rearranged itself in a way no one had planned. No one said it out loud. But everyone knew that the positions in the story had changed. After I moved out of the basement, nothing collapsed all at once like in a movie. It unfolded slowly, in sequence, and very real. My brother had to close part of his office. The satellite sign in the West Side Commercial Plaza was taken down on a Monday morning. I knew because a friend sent me a photo and said it looked like they were moving out. 2 offices were given back to the landlord. 3 employees received notice within 2 weeks. I did not call to ask him. I did not need to. This town is small. News moves faster than wind. About a month later, a divorce filing was submitted. I saw it on the county court public portal. There was no long post about family matters, no explanation, just a single line, petition for divorce citing financial pressure. I closed my laptop and continued my meeting with my team. That afternoon, my brother called. His voice was lower, slower, no longer carrying the confidence that once made a room follow him. "Can you meet me for a bit?" he asked. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near his old office. He sat at a table by the window, tie undone, shirt slightly wrinkled. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. He did not circle around the point. He said he never wanted to practice law. He said Dad wanted him to. I asked him since when. He said since senior year of high school. I asked why he did not say something sooner. He looked out at the street and said he thought he would get used to it. I did not argue. I did not comfort him. I asked what he planned to do next. He said maybe he would shut down the office entirely and take short-term legal consulting contracts. I asked if he was scared. He said yes. I nodded. I said being scared does not mean you are wrong. We sat a few more minutes without looking at each other, watching people pass by the window. For the first time I saw him not trying to appear certain. He shrugged and said he did not know yet. I nodded and said, then figure it out. The conversation ended when there was nothing more to say. When I stood up, he thanked me for coming. I said we are both adults now, and left. A few days later, my mother called. She wanted to meet at the park near the old house. She arrived in her familiar beige coat, hair tied neatly back. She sat on a bench, placed her handbag beside her, and looked straight ahead. Maybe we placed expectations in the wrong direction, she said. I did not ask who she meant. She continued that things do not always have to follow one path. I looked at her and saw for the first time that she was speaking without defense. I asked if she had said that to Dad. She said not yet. We sat a few minutes in silence, listening to dry leaves rustle under passing footsteps. Before she stood up, she said she thought she had been silent for too long. I told her she could start speaking now. That evening, my father called. I was at the dinner table with my son, clearing the plates. I stepped out onto the balcony to take the call. "You embarrassed me," he said right after I answered. His voice was not loud, but firm and direct. I leaned against the railing and looked down at the parking lot below. "I only told the truth," I replied. He said some truths do not need to be spoken in front of a crowd. I said some words spoken in front of a crowd are also the truth. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked if I saw the consequences. I said I did. He asked if I was satisfied. I said I did not speak to satisfy anyone. The call ended there. No one apologized. No one raised their voice. I walked back inside. My son asked who called. I said it was Grandpa. He nodded and continued putting books into his backpack. In the weeks that followed, I saw my brother begin selling off office furniture online. The large conference table was listed. The wooden bookshelves were moved out. I did not join the usual weekend family conversations. No one invited me. I did not ask. Nothing ended with an explosion. It changed through small actions, short calls, signs taken down. My brother admitted he never wanted to practice law. My mother said maybe expectations had been misplaced. My father said I embarrassed him. I said I only told the truth. And for the first time, no one laughed when I spoke. I bought my own house at the beginning of fall, after completing the legal review and signing all loan documents. The notary office that morning smelled of wood and weak coffee. I sat across from the bank representative, signing each page, carefully reading the mortgage terms. confirming that my name was the sole owner. The attorney asked if I needed any changes. I said no. It just needed to be correct and clear. When I held the keys in my hand, I did not feel the need to take a photo. I drove home, opened the door, stepped into the empty house, walked through each room, touching the walls as if to confirm it was real. No one lived above me. No one walked back and forth overhead. I placed my laptop on the living room floor, turned on a temporary hotspot to check email. 3 new messages. 2 contracts waiting for signature. I signed them immediately in a house that still echoed with my own footsteps. The sound of my steps carried across the new wood floors. My son ran behind me, looked around the living room, and asked if this was our house. I said yes, our house. That night we ate pizza on the floor, the box between us, no dining table, no witnesses. In the first week I installed curtains, set up Wi-Fi, placed a desk in the small room beside the stairs. I hung my work calendar on the wall, marked flights between 2 states. My company expanded into 2 states that same year. I signed leases for small representative offices in each location, 3 desks and 1 glass conference room, enough to meet clients. I hired 2 more project managers and converted a longtime freelancer into a full-time employee. Each month I flew back and forth at least once, met clients in person, signed contracts, reviewed growth metrics. Revenue increased steadily, not in spikes, but consistently. I paid salaries on time, paid taxes on schedule, and met with my accountant each quarter to review cash flow. On Saturday afternoons, I still took my son to soccer practice, sat on the cold metal bleachers, opened my laptop to answer emails while waiting for his team to play. One day at school, his teacher organized a career introduction session for parents. I heard my son speak before she passed the phone to me. My mom runs a company. His voice was steady, like he was stating something obvious. I heard a few murmurs in the background. Then the question, what kind of company? He answered, a brand strategy company. I took the phone, confirmed the details, then returned to the meeting waiting for me. No one needed to explain anything to him after that. One afternoon, while reviewing a quarterly report, an envelope was placed at my door. My father's familiar handwriting was on the front. I left it on the kitchen table until evening before opening it. Inside was a short letter. He wrote that he had misjudged. He wrote that he had viewed success through one mold and had failed to see my part. There was no long apology, no explanation about the party, just one sentence of acknowledgement. I finished reading, folded it, placed it in my desk drawer. I did not bring the letter to church. I did not show it to anyone. I kept it as a late confirmation. When I saw my father next, he did not mention the party. He asked how my work was going. I said I was expanding into a 2nd state. He nodded. The conversation ended there. Nothing more was needed. I did not call him immediately. 2 days later, I texted that I had received the letter. He replied that he knew. During the holidays, I brought my son to visit. I parked in front of the old house, walked in through the main door, not the basement entrance. My mother made tea. My father sat at the dining table, talking about the weather and football. No one mentioned the recent past. When my mother suggested that if I ever needed to stay temporarily while renovating more, my old room was still there, I said thank you but no need. I have my own house. I left before dark, locked the door of my new home, checked the alarm system, then went upstairs to say goodnight to my son. His room has a window facing the backyard, streetlight reflecting on the pale blue wall. I closed the door gently. I did not move back in. I did not organize any announcement about what I had accomplished. I continued working, signing more contracts, expanding a small team in the 2nd state. In my home office, I hung the company award on the wall, not to show off, just to remind myself I once started at a folding table in a basement. I did not defeat anyone. I simply live in a house under my name, run my own company, and hear my son speak about me without lowering his voice. I am no longer the shadow in the basement. If you have ever been underestimated in your own family, if you have quietly rebuilt your life without anyone noticing, you will understand that feeling. We do not always need to shout to prove anything. Sometimes it is enough to stand straight and speak the truth. Does this story resonate with you? Leave a comment and follow the channel so we can continue sharing the stories no one says out loud but many people have lived through.